540 BCE. And what he was is a material monist. That's the school of thought he established in the history of Western philosophy. Now, if you're an ancient philosopher, and this is the first sort of kindling of culture that Western society really had, right? What you're trying to do is figure out, why is there something rather than nothing? Here I am, I'm experiencing an entire existence. Right? I have things that I call truth, I have things that I call fiction, I have the distinction between truth and lie here. Right? Well, what makes all this stuff what it is? Is there a rational principle that we can use to explain why there's something rather than nothing, and what this something is, what it means to me, and what I should do about it? Right? So that's the situation that the ancient philosophers found themselves in. They weren't the first people to ask these kinds of questions. It's just before the Western philosophers in our recorded history. Well, before that, these questions were answered spiritually by believing in a god or gods, more accurately there, right? A number of gods. Why does the sun come up in the morning? Oh, well, that's Apollo, right? Why do the crops grow? Oh, well, that's Pan, right? They had a god for about everything. Any sort of question that a human being may have, God's the answer. Right? There was God for this, God for that, God for planting your crops, God for bearing your wife, God for falling in love, God for having a romantic lustful fling, right? God if you want to go to war, God if you want to stay at peace, God if you want to know anything, and that was Athena, which puts us in Athens. Right? Now, there are two stories. One, the first bad joke about philosophers. I'm sure you've all heard those bad jokes about the unemployed philosophers. There's actually, if you Google it, a little outfit by the name of the Unemployed Philosophers Guild, and they've got a number of really cutesy kind of intellectual joke trinket novelties, right? Including some cards with philosophers on them, fridge magnets, what have you. They even have Freudian slippers. So I guess they're getting free advertising. Anyhow, bad jokes have been around as long as philosophers have been around, right? So everybody's been kind of hacking at our expense. Right? The first story about Western philosophy has Thales walking in a field and looking up in the stars and contemplating what's in the heavens and under the earth, and paying so much attention to this stargazing that he was doing, was wondering that he couldn't see what was right at his feet, and he fell into a pit. And this was reported and joked about by a slave girl who witnessed the incident. Now, that's the first bad joke about philosophers. Our heads so far up in the clouds that we can't see what's right at our feet, or staring us right in the face. Now, same story. I prefer this version. Thales was walking in this field, and while he was walking in this field, what was he doing? He was doing astronomy. And Thales was a noted astronomer. And while he was doing astronomy, what he realized was that the weather conditions would be favorable for an unprecedentedly large olive crop to come in. Right? So he predicted a huge olive crop, and he fell in a pit. Once he got out of the pit, the first thing that he did was used all of his wealth to buy up every single olive press in all of ancient Greece, or close to. Right? So when this huge olive crop came in the following season, he would own all of the olive presses, and all of these farmers would have to come to him, pay him a fee to use the olive presses. So, study philosophy, earn big money. And if you believe that. Anyhow, Thales was said to have gotten the ball rolling for Western philosophy by predicting, by some sort of rational means rather than spiritual or superstitious means, right, an eclipse. He was able to do this. So reason attempts to come to terms with nature rather than just superstitiously relating to it. Right? So that's the start point of Western philosophy. Now, Paley's answer to this question was, there's something rather than nothing. What's the underlying nature of all this stuff? Well, all of this stuff, its underlying nature for him was water. Water. Right? Everything is water. Now, this seems crazy to us now, but, well, what are we looking for on Mars to demonstrate that there might have been life? Water. Right? On Earth, what does every living thing need to survive? Water. Right? If you're in ancient Greece, you look around, what do you see in every direction? Water. So this led Thales to also theorize that the Earth was a flat disk resting in a pot of water. Can't win them all. But nonetheless, Thales marks that starting point, right? That point where reason is used to address these big problems rather than superstitious means. Right? It's also the birth point of all of the sciences, philosophy being the mother of all of the sciences. Right? So, Thales, won't test you on it ever, won't come up. Right? Now, the two pre-Socratic philosophers that are of major note in framing the debate that we find Socrates in are Heraclitus and Parmenides. Heraclitus lived around 535 to 475 BCE, and he was an empiricist. Right? So his attempt to say, why is there something rather than nothing? Well, how he's going to get evidence to support a claim to knowledge is through, the senses. Right? The senses, Heraclitus argues, give us accurate information in order to base knowledge claims about the world. Right? Now, Heraclitus, in his investigations, famously coined the phrase, "You cannot step into the same river twice." When he looked around, trusting his senses and analyzing rationally the data that his senses gave him, what he noticed was the constant was change. Right? Everything is in a constant state of change. This thing changes, I change, you change, technology changes, temperature changes. Everything is in this constant process of changing. Right? There's multiplicity, and this is where I notice these video lectures are a whole lot harder on my chalk. Right? There are many things. This is a piece of chalk. This is a piece of chalk. As is this. These are all chalk, but are different from one another. So that while there are fewer ideas of things, types of things, right? There are many of them. I'm human, you're human, your parents were human, etc. Right? Change, multiplicity, and what this entire ball of wax is called is flux. Right? So everything's in a constant state of flux. So Heraclitus noticed, right? And I'll give you a few examples of this just to see if we can't wrap our minds around it. Right? That if you go down to, let's say, the Detroit River, stick your foot in, take it out, and 2 seconds later, put your foot back in. What you'll find is that not a single solitary bit of water that was touching your foot the first time is touching your foot the second time. You cannot step into the same river twice. Just because there's so much of this multiplicity and everything is in this constant state of change, everything's in flux. Right? These entities that we tend to treat as permanent, things that we make some sort of enduring claim to know, are constantly not themselves. Right? So the second you come to know anything, that thing changes. Think about it this way. Right? The university you're at. Did your parents go there? Well, some people's parents went there. People went there years ago.